And welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Jayme Wojciechowski.
I'm Marilyn Brown.
And okay, first, we not everyone can see us. If you're listening to the podcast version, you won't have noticed yet that Marilyn looks very different. She has a fabulous new hairdo, and I want to know what prompted the change.
Yes, that's such a good question. So it was a long, something I was thinking about for a long time, but then once I decided to do it, it was pretty quick. So probably for the last 2 years or so, my hair hasn't really felt like me. When I first went natural and I started kind of getting to know my own natural hair in like 2008, it really started to feel like me, and I was just kind of connecting with it and watching videos and learning more about natural hair care. And so all of that felt great. And then at some point, like a couple of years ago, it just didn't really feel like me, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I'd kind of think about cutting it and thinking about color and things. But with color, there was always this fear of um, damaging my hair. And it was always like, oh, I don't want to put any color in my hair. And so I'm in my mid 30s and I've never colored my hair before. And that's something that I've always wanted to do and been interested in doing. And just like, I like to play with style. I like to play with my style with clothes. Like, style is a way that I express myself. And so hair was something that I always felt very limited in, because I felt like it's so important to grow healthy hair and to show that I can grow healthy hair, and to kind of, it becomes, there's a lot with um, hair as a Black woman, that there's a lot of history around hair, and there's a lot of issues around hair. There's a lot of discrimination that Black women face based on hair and natural hairstyles. And so doing things like colors that are out of the ordinary, or more, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. I wouldn't even say flamboyant, but maybe just more interesting styles, maybe less, more natural kind of elaborate styles. A lot of times there's discrimination. There's actually a study that was published in 2016 that from the Perception Institute, that Black women with natural hair are discriminated against in the workplace. And so all of that to be said, that my own natural hair journey has been a really long, complicated thing, and I always made it. I always put such a priority on maintaining my hair as kind of this way to show something about myself. And so this was more of like it's only hair. And I saw a picture like a week and a half ago, and I fell in love with it, and I just fell in love with the look, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And it just like really resonated with me really deeply. And I was like sending it to my friends and family, like, this is what I want to do. What do you think? And it just felt like the right thing. And so it was a combination of like seeing something that felt right and resonated with me, but also on top of just being able to like let go of my attachment to my hair, and like, what that means to be able to grow hair, and what your hair looks like, and texture, and all of that stuff, and be willing to just like play and do something fun. So yeah, that was a
Yeah.
long answer.
No, I love it.
But it's been a lot that's kind of gone into it, and it's been like I said, it was a long process coming to this decision. But then as soon as I saw that picture, and I was like, yes, that's it. That's what I want to look like. It was like, went for it.
Yeah, it's nice, and it reminds me of just I don't know if we've ever talked about it as kind of the uh, Buddhist concept of self, and the idea that our self is constantly evolving and it's never the same in any two moments. And I think a lot of people, I think a lot of people struggle with that because they see the idea of self as this defined thing. So then they're constantly judging their past and their future based on what they think is this fixed thing. So what I liked you said, what I loved that you said was about how in 2008 you were in alignment with where you were at, and then you realized that it was time for a change because your idea of self had changed.
Yes. Yeah. Drastically, it had changed. It's changed in the last couple of years. And so I think that was why, whereas at that point, the change was kind of more gradual. This is like a more drastic change that kind of reflects where I feel like I've been
Mm-hmm.
going and kind of have seen myself in the last couple of years. But I think a lot of times with growth, a lot of it happens internally and kind of quietly on the inside. And then from the outside, it can look like things have kind of quickly happened, but there was a lot that kind of took to get to the point to be able to let go and not care that, like, I did these changes and let something go that I had been, that I had again put a lot of my identity and kind of sense of self around over the last, few years or so.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had a quote, and now there's another topic that I think is really resonating with me is this idea of I feel in my own mindfulness journey there's this kind of push and pull between materialism and the body, and it's interesting with hair specifically because I feel like hairstyles and changing hairstyles can have a direct effect on how you feel as a person. Not necessarily that they have to be the way you're doing your hair is an expression of who you are, but drastic changes in hair and just I think seeing yourself in the way it feels, whether it's long, short, all those things have a subconscious effect on our psyche and how we feel, even if it's just on a sensory level. Because I'm thinking about as an actor, I never actually realized I did this. Whenever I'm playing a role where they give me some kind of drastically different hair, I always end up wanting to keep it for a while to kind of just experience life, I guess, with that hair. It sounds funny, and I've never actually consciously thought about this, but now that is probably why I do it. Is it's just it gives me a different feeling, and I kind of want to take that experience I have diving into a character and kind of I guess soak in it a little longer, and the keeping the hair kind of helps. And I've heard with other actors, people will do that with costume pieces or the shoes they wore as a character just to kind of feel something new. And I guess it's
Yeah.
weird because now it does kind of go into the quote I had, which I'll read. It's a Pema Chodron quote. Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. And for me, I guess tying it in with the hair thing is I do think what resonates with me in the quote is this idea of shared humanity, and in that understanding is where compassion comes from, and also where compassion leads. And I think doing things like doing anything that makes you feel different ways or explore different things, I think helps build your capacity to be able to be compassionate and kind of understand the shared humanity. Because I think there's kind of two aspects to it. There's a compassion element and then an empathy element, right? So compassion is more being in a clinical sense is more being able to understand someone else, and empathy is actually being able to feel and put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I think those require slightly different abilities, and they work in slightly different ways. I'm pointing to the same place, but I think they're two slightly different tools, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think they're slightly different tools, and I think that playing a character as an actor is a way to step into using those tools, kind of whichever one you connect with more. And I think that, yeah, with hair, it's a similar thing. It's kind of this experience of being able to go out in the world and be perceived differently. And so to have a different experience, to kind of, to step out into the world and with a different lens that people are perceiving you from, which kind of creates a different experience for you. And I think, if we could look at life more like that, and not saying, kind of just putting on like a role and playing somebody that you're not, because I don't want it to seem like, I mean, going out in the world and like
Right.
putting on a character, but I do think that like finding a way to be less tied to who you perceive yourself as already, or whatever box you've kind of already put yourself in, and being willing to step out into the world with a different attitude, a different kind of way about yourself, a different kind of way that you're perceiving yourself. I think that actually can really open you up to new experiences. I think that we have to be open to experience empathy or compassion. We have to be open, and so when we open ourselves up to different experiences, then we're kind of open to also having a different perception of those experiences and building kind of different relationships, and being able to take that and integrate that into yourself. I hear
Mm-hmm.
from actors, and I don't know if this is true for you, but I hear from actors that they integrate a part of the character, maybe not every character, but a lot of kind of those meaningful characters that you'll play, or roles that you'll play, a lot of times that will impact someone so much that you kind of integrate parts of that person into yourself as you're evolving, and going back to what you said before, that we're constantly kind of moving and shifting and evolving. And so being able to kind of integrate those pieces into yourself. And so for me, similar to like when I walked out this week, I felt a different kind of confidence about myself, and I wouldn't say that I'm just like extremely insecure at this point in my life. I feel pretty confident in where I'm at most times, but it was just I just had a different kind of feeling stepping out into the world, knowing that like, I stand out more, and
Mm-hmm.
being okay with that, and being able to accept that standing out more, and actually enjoying that feeling, and kind of allowing that to like nourish me, um, and giving myself permission to feel that, to get attention and be okay with that. So there was kind of a lot of things that just in this last week have happened for me, just with making a drastic hair change.
Right. And it's interesting because I think one of the questions I get the most about, it's mostly from people who are looking into Buddhism and still have kind of a standard. They're trying to put it in the box of a standard organized religion with theology and set rules, which
Right.
some Buddhist sects are like that, but some aren't. And what I get asked a lot is about the minimalism and the anti-materialistic aspect of the religion, specifically around hair and tattoos, on if they are mindful, and if doing that is mindful, if they're materialistic,
Mm-hmm.
just in nature. And for me, and whenever this comes up, it becomes a heated debate between different schools of thought and how people just perceive it. So this is not me speaking for Buddhism or anything. It's just speaking for me. For me, it's like everything else we talk about. It's a tool. So if you're getting a tattoo or changing your hair as a way to escape something or to hide from something, that's not very mindful. But if you're using it to remind yourself to be mindful and to help yourself grow, then you are using it in a way that is mindful.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And I think that like, I think that I understand the reason for the debate, and the source for that debate. But I also think that, for me, I think there is a concept of being able to kind of be mindfully styled, and pay attention to that, because I think that how I present myself in the world is really a reflection of how I'm feeling about myself. And when I'm mindful about that, and when I'm thinking about that, and I'm doing it from a place of not of, competition with others, or judgment of, wanting to kind of appear to be something, but I'm really thinking about, who am I, and how can I present myself in the world, and like you said, use it as a tool to be my best and kind of most mindful self. I think that's that is mindful. But I also think that for some people, that's not a part of their mindful process. And for some people, there's not really an inclination to style themselves differently, or, that your mind just doesn't even go there. And so I think that for that person, that's mindful as well, kind of doing what works for you and not allowing other people to kind of tell you, well, you need to pay more attention to this, or you need to care more to be, of value. You know what I mean? So I think it really kind of comes from a personal place. But I know for me personally, how I, dress myself, how I style myself, tattoos, things like that are part of me being able to share myself in an honest and kind of authentic way.
Yeah. I think too there's an interesting distinction between what I think you're saying in that you wanted to change to put something else, to put a different self out there in front of others, but not necessarily in a way where you're trying or planning to control it. As opposed to, I'll give an example. The debate over whether tattoos and these things are materialistic or can be mindful always starts with talking about meditation beads, because a lot of people wear them, and I think there's people wear them for all different reasons. But I'll give kind of one example on each side. Is I know a lot of people who will wear them because they like that through the day it reminds them to take a breath, to step back, to be mindful. There's a very clear intention for why they wear them. And I know people who wear them because they want everyone to know that they meditate and that they're spiritually enlightened and all these things. Are trying that their intention is to manipulate others into perceiving them a certain way, and a way that they want controlled. And to me, that is the unmindful way to do it, as opposed to, and I feel like that's a difference in perception that you're talking about, because you're saying you want to be perceived differently because you feel differently and you're putting something else out there. But the part that would make that unmindful is if you were trying to control that and saying, I want people to see me this specific way, so I'm going to change myself to fit in to that and try to control how others are perceiving me, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, no, this is definitely coming from like the change is from the inside and kind of just wanting the outside to reflect that. Because I think a lot of times people don't know where you're at. People don't realize that people have grown. I think that's one of the struggles, is a lot of times we witness people and we see each other, but we have these expectations for people to be the same person that they were a decade ago, just based on what we see. And so I think for me, it's kind of just being able to share, like, I'm different, I feel different, I look different. So however you perceive that is okay. But I do think that even, with like the wearing the meditation beads and the malas, I like that example. And I think that, even when someone is doing it to kind of control that perception, I think that like that's something that they can kind of like, that's a what am I trying to say? For that person, that's where they're at. And so kind of for another person observing that, being able to, so I guess the debate for me, when people are kind of debating whether it's mindful or whether it's not, I think it's like one of those things where I think it's really hard to say because someone's intentions are so internal. And if it is, to kind of control the perception or to create a image of being this mindful, enlightened person, then there's still a desire to kind of be that person, and there's an interest in that. And so even if they can kind of dig in and learn from that, then it's still, that's kind of just a part of their process.
Right. It's about the awareness of it.
Yes. Totally.
In the example I gave, I think where it latches, a lot of the people who debate this, who specifically are talking about it from the perspective, who are new to mindfulness, are unaware that their intention is them trying to manipulate others into seeing them a certain way. So
Right.
I think in the lack of awareness is where it becomes unmindful, because
Yes.
really any of your intention, mindfulness, like we say, is a tool. Any intention you have, as long as there's an awareness of it, that's mindful. Whether that's a good intention or a bad intention, it's still mindful to a point.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I had a thought and now it's running from my head. uh oh Shared humanity, and I
Yes.
we were talking about the perception of self, and I love that idea of perception of self, because it's interesting, because I think most people understand that when they look at themselves as a self, that they are ever changing, and that there is nothing, there's not like a fixed being. We are learning, we are growing. And it's interesting that it seems like when we perceive others' sense of self, we do give this idea that in others, self is fixed.
Hmm.
So we meet someone and we have this perceived idea of who they are, and it's very hard to change that perception. There almost needs to be, and it goes back into the shared humanity, because the only times I ever see it really change is when there is a deep moment of shared humanity between two people, and then they kind of open up to realizing that the other person is not what they thought. There's a deeper understanding of I think that shared humanity and shared self, and shared being and shared compassion, and all those things.
Yeah, I think we have like a very narrow, very, very narrow perception of other people. And so I think that, like, as you were talking about that, I was thinking, the things about myself that I feel like I'm sharing more or I'm, expressing more have always been there, but they haven't really been expressed, right? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
part of it is that we know ourselves, and we know that there's deeper things that we're not like expressing to the world. We know that we have our inner desires and interests and things that maybe we're not completely comfortable sharing yet, but we're aware of that for ourselves. But I think that we have this lack of awareness of that for other people. And so a lot of times, you'll see where we have expectations that people be the same, or be presenting themselves in the same way that they were when we knew them, or when we met them. And yet that person may be now being more open and honest about what they're interested in, or kind of more in touch with themselves on a deeper level. And so I think it's interesting, because I think we can realize that we're deep, but we seem to like make everybody else kind of surface level, which is
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of funny. And I think that that's right where you're talking about that shared humanity, when we have an experience with someone where we actually recognize, oh, okay, no, there is a lot below the surface. There's a lot more to you than I realize. There's a lot that we can connect on. But a lot of times I think we're just not, our expectations are based on kind of surface level awareness of others.
Right. It's interesting too how we, and I'm assuming this is a human thing, but it's definitely an American thing, at least, is how we assign people. How do I want to word this? That we assume we know things about people based on how they look. And I'm thinking about, I mean, I'm going back to hair, and it's like, it does, you don't think about it on a daily basis, but if I see someone on the street, I have, I create an idea of who they are based on how they're dressed, what their hair is, uh, all those things. And I'm aware enough that a lot of times I will, yes, I kind of take that analysis, but then I'm aware enough to know, like, that's just my mind putting things together based on how they look. That's not actually any reflection of who they are as a person, but my mind still naturally does that, and I think that's a survival thing of just knowing like what's danger based on cues and all that stuff. But it's interesting because I think a lot of people don't have the awareness and truly believe that people are the way they look based on how you perceive those looks
That
to me.
look. Right, right. Yeah, and as you were talking about that, the biggest thing for me I was thinking about is race. And you think about how huge that perception is. So for people who have not had any experience with Black people, haven't met Black women, don't know anybody, then they may meet me and they're going to have all these expectations about me and who they think I am based on that. And I've experienced that so many times in my life. And I'm at the point now, there were multiple different ways that I would experience it. Frustration, just kind of like thinking it was kind of comical at different points in my life, being sad about it at different points in my life. And now it's just kind of, now that I have the awareness and I can kind of just step back and see this person just has no idea that they're doing that. They're not even aware that that's what they're doing, because a lot of times, when people are doing it to me, it's not in a negative, it's not in like a hateful way. It's often, cloaked in a very kind of positive, oh my gosh, and then all of these things about me are things that they've assumed about me based on me being a Black woman, and so it's interesting because I think that we all do it. And I just think that the level that we do it on based on our own experiences and how broad our lens is. So if you have a much broader lens, or you grew up with a lens that, you experience lots of different types of people, lots of different presentations, you're still going to do it because we're human, but maybe not on as much of a pervasive level as somebody who grew up in a really insular bubble, where they didn't experience a lot of different races and cultures and viewpoints and styles. You look at certain areas where everybody looks the same, as far as like style and kind of dressing and what people are comfortable wearing. I've visited places in the country where I'm just amazed at how similar everybody looks, just with like clothing choices.
My hometown, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Just living in LA, growing up outside of Chicago, I've always experienced a pretty diverse level of style, and so my lens is different.
Yeah, that's. Yeah. I mean, every time I get off the plane visiting home, that's the first thing I notice. I look in the airport, I'm like, everybody looks the same. It's so weird.
Yeah, yeah. That was one thing. My friends who moved to a different city in Louisiana noticed. They were just like, everybody dresses the same. It's amazing.
It's interesting though, because I'm trying to put this into a perspective of mindfulness, and I don't even think it's a question of are these judgments mindful or not, because I'm thinking, well, if we want to get to a place where we don't have these judgments, that to me seems unmindful as well, because I'm thinking about the people you hear it all the time of, this is a specific example, I don't see color. And whenever I hear someone say that, I have two thoughts, and this may me not being very mindful and thinking that I put it kind of in, they're either lying or they're just incredibly unaware, because I feel like if you were aware of the cultural and racial issues in the country, you would see it, because you would see that there's something wrong. You would see, like, I mean, for me, mostly in the terms of when I see race or even different religion or nationalities, things like that, my judgments aren't necessarily based on what I think I think that person is. I go straight to questioning what their experience is based on what I know about the issues surrounding race and religion and nationality and those things, if that makes sense. So I think it's a tool like anything else, where it's just human nature to take visual cues, and it's trying to bring as much mindfulness into how we and awareness into how we take in those visual cues and what we do with them, that makes it mindful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that like the expectation that there's not that it won't happen is not really mindful at all. You know, just that expectation. I mean, there's a part of it that's just, I mean, not even a part of it. A lot of it is just kind of a natural reaction. And but it's more about what do you do with that? How do you integrate that? How do you allow that to, how do you allow your awareness of that, of the fact that you do make these judgments and you do have, you know, you do have these kind of initial judgments. How can you be aware of that and allow that awareness to create how you actually behave, you know, because there's judgments and there's our initial, you know, seeing things or feeling something or gut reactions or fears or if we're triggered by something. All of that is very visceral. There's a lot of that we can't control, but we can control our reaction. You can control whether you say something or you tweet something hateful or you know, have a negative conversation or you express that to somebody or you know, so I think part of that is that you have to bring the awareness in to your own triggers and your own reactions to things so that you can integrate that and use that in a way that's mindful. And that's what kind of that whole process is what makes it mindful, having to
Right.
do that process. We can't just be triggered and just allow our automatic reactions to dictate our behaviors and then kind of just fall back on, well, this is what I know, or I was triggered. That's extremely unmindful. And I think a lot of times people do fall back on that it's easy to say, well, this is what I know, or this is what I've seen, or this is where I grew up, but not being willing to do that work of kind of being mindful and moving forward.
Right. Yeah, it's the other part of the quote that I really love, and something I think is the hardest part of compassion in relation to mindfulness. And I'll just read the one sentence. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others.
Mm-hmm.
And the buzzword or phrase I use is selective compassion. I feel like we are a culture of selective compassion where we like to deem who is worthy of compassion and who isn't worthy of compassion. And I think, well, we do it for a lot of different reasons. We do it because it makes ourselves better, or makes ourselves feel better about people doing terrible things. It's easier to just label someone as evil and undeserving of our compassion than realize that this is a human being who has been formed to do these terrible things, and they're, even though they've doing these terrible things, there is a shared humanity, and that's
Yeah.
very scary. And I like going back to the acting thing. I think that's one of the biggest lessons I learned as an actor, because I tend to play edgier characters who are quite dark. And I think the only way you really are able to go there is if you realize where the shared humanity is and what how you as an individual would possibly get to where these people are, and understanding that if you were put in their shoes with their entire history, it's very likely that you would end up the same way. And I think out of context of acting, I think on a daily basis, I think that's petrifying to a lot of people, to think in every human is that capacity to do terrible things under certain conditions. But I think in that is what is going to propel us forward into being more mindful. And it's like we've said so many times, is compassion is not about excusing behavior. It's not about accepting it. It's about bringing an awareness of why it's happening on a deep level, and so you can move forward to real solutions. We live in a country where the solution is lock them up, separate them, and you're good, and we just mass incarcerate anyone we don't like, and that's our solution. But it really changes nothing because we're not fixing any issues at the core,
Mm-hmm.
because we really have believed and are ruled by this idea of selective compassion.
Right, right. And the more you continue to do that process, the more it actually creates, the more kind of you have to, the more people you have to lock up, the more people that fit under that kind of umbrella of being the forgotten, the ones that are not worthy of that compassion, to kind of keep that system going, because the system in and of itself is not compassionate.
Right.
And so it's like it has to kind of continue to feed, and it grows. And you look at our incarceration system in this country, and I mean, just from when I was a little kid to what it is now is just astonishing. The numbers, and I think that you're right. It's because of how we choose to marginalize and separate and otherize,
Mm-hmm.
people that have negative behaviors, rather than being able to recognize that concept of shared humanity, and see our own connection, and see how somebody could end up in that place, and treat them with compassion as we would our own if someone was in that experience.
Right. And I think it's a negative with where humanity is at with this expansion into kind of globalism, because I mean, globalism is great for us being interconnected and have a broader understanding of what is happening globally and feeling more, I guess, part of the world as opposed to just part of a country or a race or a religion or whatever the box we're going to put people
Hmm.
in. But I think one of the challenges of it is it takes us out of this feeling of community in a way, because it just seems like things get so big and there's so many people, and there's um, a, a larger distance between people. Because I'm thinking about when I was in Iceland and how they do their prison system, and they don't have a prison system. They
Right.
have a few hundred people who are in rehabilitation centers, and the whole thing is, even if you're a murderer, the whole point of their thing is you are in there to learn to better your life and get out so you can be productive and a good human being. And the reason and I remember being on a tour, and the tour guide was telling people that, and the Americans were just like, you wouldn't lock him away for, they like were outraged that
Yeah.
their prison system is one of compassion, really. And the guy explained it perfectly. He was like, well, we're a small country, we know everybody. It's like if someone's being locked up for murder, it's someone's brother that's our best friend who's somehow related to someone that we care about. Like, it's just, we're not going to just lock people up and throw away the key. We care about these people, and we want to help them, but also understand how they got there so we don't repeat the same problems. And I think it's just a complete switch in mentality from the way I think most of the world really currently thinks.
Yeah. Well, I think that we are getting to a place where people are more in need of that kind of thinking, or people are craving that more. And so I think that you're right that it is completely, um, not how most of the world does things. But I think that there's starting to be a shift, and people are starting to recognize that, like, that needs to happen, and we do need to start leading with compassion, and with that awareness, and with the concept of shared humanity, because we're not going to, um, be able to kind of continue the way things are going. So I think
Right.
there has been a shift that's happening. So that's a positive thing.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, I think the to point out is the strength in full compassion and not selective compassion, because I think we live in a culture where compassion is still vastly considered weak, and a sign of weakness as opposed to a sign of strength, where it takes so much energy and so much more intellect and emotional strength and physical strength in a lot of ways to be fully compassionate even when it's hard. Someone big in the entertainment industry posted on Facebook, and I think they just shared it. I don't think they were the ones who originated it, about the problem with progressives is that they're too compassionate, and that they don't like that this person didn't like the idea of showing Republicans, Donald Trump, people they disagree with, compassion, because they don't get compassion in return. And my first instinct was to get a little defensive, and then I sat back and tried to be mindful, and I fully understood where that person is coming from, because it's incredibly challenging when someone is not showing you compassion to have the strength to then show them compassion. But that is what is going to make us different than those we are trying to affect, and the change we're trying to make. I mean, if we're just going to, if because we're not being showed compassion, we're not going to show, and we're just going to do exactly what those we disagree with are doing, then the shared humanity is much closer, because we're doing exactly what they're doing. We're the same. So we might as well be fighting with ourselves as opposed to trying to fight with some imaginary other. But I think when you try to show compassion in those hard situations, you are searching for that shared humanity, and it does two things. It helps you understand, but it also, in a lot of ways, gives you a way to tap into what they're feeling and help that person see the shared as humanity as well. And it's not, some people are just shut down, and it's never going to happen. They're never going to see your shared humanity. But I mean, at least you have a better understanding of who that person is, and the trials they're facing, I guess. And then you can come up with real solutions to help others who are receptive and open and at a place in their lives where they can grow and change.
Right. And also part of your work is accepting that there are others who won't accept or understand you know, and that's kind of part of that, being mindful about that process and kind of being able to do the work to be okay with that, and to still be able to move forward and affect change where you can.
Right. Yeah, you have to, I mean, compassion has to be, for it to be compassion, it has to be egoless. And if you're showing someone compassion in order to get compassion back, that is ego fully immersed in it. And that is not you actually, that is not compassion. That's you, I mean, in a lot of ways, faking compassion to get something in return.
Right.
Right. But I do think we are moving. I think with the global, I think we're in a weird time, just because we have so much technology at our disposal, and we're so interconnected with people, and it's still so new. I mean, the internet's only been around, I mean, people are alive who didn't have the internet. Like, it's not, we're still figuring it out. And when you look at it, there's clear pros and cons to it. As for each way we're starting to feel more connected, there's a way where we're a little bit disconnected. And I think it's going to take time to suss that out and kind of see where it takes us. I think right now it's just important to, be mindful and try to bring mindfulness into your life. And it's like from last week, the quote, it's be the example. It's not about going and trying to change everyone and making everyone be more mindful. Be mindful for yourself, and be open to those who are open to you, so that you can help them if they want help. But it really starts with us on an individual level, and then it grows.
exactly. It's important to do your own work, do your own growth. There's a song. I don't even know when the song was written, and I don't know who wrote it, so I'm gonna have to look it up later. But the song is like sweep around your own front door before you try to sweep around mine. And so basically, we all have our own growth and our own kind of focus that we can be doing, and so I think that's how we actually connect when we're able to kind of do our own work and then share that process with others. I think that's where I've really been able to connect with people and have those really positive experiences. But it starts with focusing on my own mindfulness process.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, I think it, just for people who are, I guess, struggling to find compassion or find shared humanity, I think the best ways to do it are, I mean, there's so many ways to do it. Just volunteering for causes, helping the homeless, just going. I mean, there's so many different churches and community services that you can go to just meet people. Like, I can't remember, but someone, who was it? It was a completely different topic. We were talking about Black Lives Matter and about how a lot of white people go to Black Lives Matter events, and their big question is, well, how can I become better educated? Or please
Mm-hmm.
explain to me this
Yeah.
situation or stuff like that. And someone said, don't, when you ask for it, it's just it's off-putting, and it's because it's not someone else's job to do that. But there are ways to do it without asking and for it to be a genuine thing. And they were saying, go to primarily black church and go just sit in the service and meet people, not with the expectation that you're going to sit them down and be like, explain racism to me,
Right. Teach
but
me.
just to
Yeah.
get to know them and to be a friend and to be part of their communities. And that's how you learn. I mean, with me, I don't think I've ever sat anyone down to be like, explain this issue to me. It's just I learn about the issue because I my network is so diverse that I know people affected by every issue, and I know them as human beings, not as just a
Cause.
person part of this issue.
Right.
And I think that is where it all comes from, because the internet's a great resource for gathering information
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be sussed out because there's a lot of fake information. And there's great videos and things to help understand, and people put up their personal stories, but it's still not the same as actually living those stories with people.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think you're 100% right. You need to kind of do the work of exposing yourself to the issues and to people who are affected by those issues, and like you said, not in a way of coming in and kind of either, you know, expecting to have some kind of role in the direction of things, or coming in wanting to kind of teach, but just coming in and being there, you know, just seeing, like you said, volunteering at a church, going and spending time in different communities. And actually, I think part of what's difficult about that is that that's uncomfortable for people. And I think that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of the difficult part, is that when we put ourselves into different spaces, I think the internet allows for some disconnection. And so it makes it
Right.
less uncomfortable. But I think to really grow and to kind of gather some impact from it, I think that really putting yourself in a position where you are actually exposed to people and speaking and sharing stories and making yourself uncomfortable by going into communities that you're not used to, that maybe you just drive through
Mm-hmm.
on the freeway, but actually, you know, going into some of these spaces and doing the work, and kind of doing the work around what comes up when you are in those spaces and what's uncomfortable for you, and not asking the people who are there to help you process that work, or like marveling over, you know, this is my first time at a black church or something like that.
Right.
And, you know, expecting the people there to be like, well, congratulations, good for you, you know, you came. But just being able to then go and kind of digest that elsewhere, and do your work to kind of explore what that feels like for yourself. But I think part of that, we have to be willing to be a little uncomfortable
Hmm.
and to really kind of gather that empathy. And I think that's where a lot of times that empathy comes from, is by feeling what that feels like.
Right. And growth, I mean, in general, I think growth rarely happens when we're comfortable. If it
Right.
ever happens when we're comfortable, it's not until we're uncomfortable that growth happens. I mean, one of my other favorite quotes is "Life begins at the end of your comfort zone," and I,
Oh, yep.
I mean, I can't think of any time in my life where I've grown being comfortable. I mean, that's what growth is. Growth is uncomfortable. I mean,
Yep.
puberty is uncomfortable. Like,
It's
like it's.
growing pains is not
Yes.
it's not a term for no reason. Yeah, growth is painful. It's uncomfortable. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Okay. Well, I don't really have a homework assignment.
No, I don't have one either.
Yeah.
But
I hope everyone is safe. We're both in Los Angeles, so things are a little crazy with all the fires and stuff. I feel like they're doing a great job of evacuating people before there's too much tragedy, which is great. But a lot of people are losing their homes, and
yeah,
it's just intense. So
it's very, very intense. And if you're getting evacuation orders, please heed those warnings. I think that it's scary to leave your things, but at the same time, it's these fires are moving so fast, and so it's pretty risky out there. But yeah, it's very, very intense, and so we're just wishing everybody safety right now.
yeah, and just try to, if you're in LA, try to keep yourself informed of what's going on, because there's tons of street closures. I drove through the fires today in the 405 because there was nowhere else to go, so they were rerouting everyone on the 405 before they closed it. But it was incredibly scary, and just watching the drivers, every driver who passed by me, you could just see the terror in their eyes. So if you can avoid going in those areas, if you can take day off work, whatever, try to be as safe as possible.
Yes, yeah. All right,
Okay.
thank you guys. We'll see you
Yep.
next week.
Sounds good. Bye.